I'm Chip Freund, and this is the Artist Spotlight, conversations with contemporary artists based on 5 simple questions that explore the artist's journey, creativity, and sources of inspiration. Welcome to a special bonus edition of the Artist Spotlight podcast.
As your guest host today, my name is Will Freund, and I am joined by the regular host of the Artist Spotlight, Chip Freund, who also happens to be my dad. Hey, Dad.
Hey, Will.
So on this exciting bonus episode of the Artist Spotlight, we're going to kind of turn the tables around a little bit here and put the spotlight on you and on a very exciting project that you have had in the works for quite a while here. So for those that kind of have been closer to us, friends and family have heard about this project, but maybe not other people have as much, that we are going on a bit of an expedition later this month. And so do you want to kind of start off and tell us, where are we going?
We are off to Olympic National Park in Washington State. If you're not familiar with that absolutely stunning national park, it's basically on the thumb that sticks out of Washington State from Seattle there. So the opposite side of Puget Sound, there's a big old peninsula. That's the Olympic Peninsula. We are heading to that park and then up to the Blue Glacier off of Mount Olympus.
Which for me sounds so exciting because this is actually going to be my first time to the Pacific Northwest. And I've only seen just beautiful images coming from that area. But this sounds like this is a particular place that we're going for a specific reason. Why are we going to the Olympic National Park?
Well, it really all goes back to the summer of 1982. So we're jumping into the Wayback Machine here 40 years ago. I spent the summer working for the Student Conservation Association on a backcountry trail crew in Olympic National Park, and our base camp was just below the Blue Glacier. And for those who can see the video, that's the backdrop behind me here is the Blue Glacier as it looked in 1982. I'm going back to recreate about a dozen images that I took in 1982, 40 years later, and they'll be exhibited as a side-by-side set of images, the Blue Glacier then and now, as a way to share my personal climate change story.
Well, and I think that is such an important way of conveying, some of the threats that are happening to our world right now through things like climate change is through our own personal stories. As a quick sidebar for those that are, know me, I actually did my own climate story last year for a project called Climate Kayaking Conversation, where I told my own story of kayaking the East Coast of the United States, trying to understand how different communities understand climate change. So this is a project that I am so excited for. Not only is it part of a family, but as another climate storyteller, I'm so excited for this project. So 1982. That puts us at 40 years. And I want to stay in this Wayback Machine for a minute here and kind of paint a picture for us. What was Olympic National Park like to you in 1982? I mean, you were, this is the summer right after college or right after high school for you. And, you're 17, you turned 18 while, working in the park there. What was it like? What are some of the images that stick in your mind from back then?
Well, let's see here. Well, I guess the first image was actually even the process of getting there. I took the Greyhound from Cleveland, Ohio, all the way out to Seattle, stopping to visit friends or family a couple of points along the way. But sort of that classic, teenage desire to go see the world, I grabbed a backpack and hopped on Greyhound and headed west. So there's a whole set of stories just around that journey. But I remember getting out there, and I'd not been to the Pacific Northwest before. I'd been to the Southwest a number of times because of a grandfather that lived in Phoenix, but I'd never been to that part of the world. And getting into the Ho rainforest, that's Hoh, at the base of the mountains there was just amazing. The fact that I learned that there were temperate rainforests. So you don't have to go to the tropics to find a rainforest. Uh, that world was just magical. You have these trees that were absolutely enormous, although there were remnants of trees that had even been bigger, but because of course this area, like so many others, had been logged, but you could then find these massive stumps that we're talking, a small living room. You couldn't fit the stump in it. I mean, it's just that big. I mean, can't even begin to convey the enormity of these giant trees, with lichens and moss hanging off of them. It really is an amazing place. And then to get up to the point where you can see the peaks and the glaciers was, like stepping into National Geographic for me as a kid. The park was just, pristine. The air was some of the cleanest in the country. The skies were amazing at night. There was very little light pollution. I remember we could see a blob of light that somebody who knew the night sky better than I did said that is the Andromeda Galaxy. I'm like, holy cow, we can see galaxies with our naked eye because the air is so clear. That's just amazing. So yeah, it was truly an impressive place. We worked real hard that summer cutting trail and all of that, and learned a ton about the outdoors as well as about myself. But hopefully that gives you at least a little bit of a picture of what was going on in 1982 in the park.
Absolutely. That paints such a good picture. And I think that is really going to kind of help ground where this project goes from here. Because as you said, that this project is all about the then and now. And that not only did you take these pictures, back in 1982, but you still have these original slides, and that we're going to be able to see them side by side. And I think by recreating frame for frame, that's going to be a really, really important kind of juxtaposition between the two. And I think one of the questions that I'm always curious about is storytelling. And so, kind of within the frame of this project, how do you see the connection between photography and storytelling?
Well, that's a great question, Will. It's going to sound cliche, but they've often said a picture is worth 1,000 words. So images are just really, really powerful storytelling because you can put so much information into that visual presentation. And we are visual creatures. So that it just makes sense that they are powerful. And we've seen that, throughout the conservation movement. There have been whole conservation movements that got started because of photographs. And if you didn't have the photographs, those conservation efforts would never have taken hold because it was a way of telling that story in a much more powerful and frankly an intimate way, because it puts the viewer in the shoes, if you will, and behind the lens of the person who was experiencing and viewing that space. It takes them there in a way that words rarely can.
That was so well put. And I think, particularly nowadays, at least for me, I think it's really important to kind of go back to photography a little bit, because right now, with so much of our content right now across all of our social media platforms, we are so video based that it's so quick, so fast, that I think going back and doing some photography allows just a single still image just to tell its own story. And I think that is so, so important. But you also just noted how that kind of kicked off some environmental movements. So that like really kind of leads into the next thing of like, in photography and art more generally, how does that play into the realm of science?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to ponder that one for just a moment here. I have come to learn, really, frankly, through, you know, being a dad raising three great kids, that the realm of art and science are not separate. In fact, they're complementary. There's all this talk of STEM today: science, technology, engineering, and math. But my middle son David was involved in a program called Odyssey of the Mind, which was a STEAM program: science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And the power that you get when you bring in the creative element that is art to the disciplines of science and technology are, amazing, because you get a multifold improvement in the outcome of whatever problem you're trying to solve. So that's one view of how science and art come together. The other is in the form of science communication, something that you know and are passionate about. That's a big part of who you are and what you do these days. Science lays out the facts that we can determine. It measures where things are, how things have changed. So there's a tremendous amount of science that clearly defines what is changing in our climate and how things will likely change in the future based on the modeling that has been done. So we've got very solid science on the fact that our climate is changing and that humans are changing and affecting or accelerating that set of changes through our activities. But we still have a debate going on that topic. So where does art play a role? It plays a role in conveying that information in a different way to a potentially different audience, in a way that potentially can engage them in the discussion. And it also is back to your earlier point on storytelling, it's a wonderful medium for storytelling, and through storytelling hopefully we can get across the divide. That's something that I learned from you and your project, and really that was a key motivator for my project, was what I saw you do with your project, Climate, Kayak, and Conversation, is that whole idea of how we get over this gulf in our society today on the topic of climate change is got to be through personal storytelling. Not about throwing facts, not about yelling at each other, not about, blaming or any of that. It's simply, hey, this is my personal experience. This is my story. This is how the Earth's climate change has affected me. So when I learned that the glacier scientists up in Washington State have been monitoring this glacier. In fact, I met some of them back in 1982 at the Glacier Research Center, which is perched up on top of the mountain there. That the park has lost 34% of its glacial ice in the last 40 years. So since I was last on this glacier, it's over a third smaller. That was sort of a gut punch to me. And what motivated me to say, all right, it's the timing couldn't be better. It's the 40th anniversary, literally to the week we'll be out there. And I have an ability to tell my story of how I will have seen the climate change in an area that was really special to me and still remains very special to me. And that's a whole other element of this project, is the fact that I get to share it with you and one of your siblings, that this is just such a special place for me. It was truly a pivotal touchstone moment in my life. And, I'm blessed as a parent to be able to share a piece of that with my kids. So a little longer wind answer than you probably were looking for.
But those are some of the best answers, in my opinion. That it, a question is something that just starts a conversation, and that, you know, where it goes from there, the question doesn't matter. So I really appreciate you kind of continuing to add some more context to that. And so kind of shifting to some of that juxtaposition of the two stories of the then and then the now. You said 12 photos. Do you want to kind of describe what some of those photos that we might be recreating might look like, and what changes you might be expecting to see?
Well, sure. So I went through my large collection of images that I took that summer and was specifically looking for images that showed a portion of the Blue Glacier and showed it in relation to its surroundings. So the one behind me here on the Zoom call is probably a classic example. We're standing down toward what was the terminus of the glacier back in '82, looking back up the glacier as it comes down from the mountain. This will be one that we recreate. And the idea here is to see, okay, where is the terminus today? So the terminus in this picture is off frame to the right. So you actually can't see the actual, final terminus of it. I suspect that the terminus will be well into frame when we get out there, as well as the edges of the glacier, I think, will have come in based on what I've seen on Google Earth. I've already determined that it looks like it's narrower and shorter. And with the very high contrast, you've got the dark rocks and then the bright white blue of the glacier. I think will make some pretty clear images of how things have changed. And when you realize just how big the glacier is, that's an awful lot of ice to melt. Other images I'm looking to recreate, there's a glacial moraine, and that's sort of the pile of rock and debris that gets deposited along the lateral or the side of the glacier as it goes. There's a scene where back in '82, we were actually doing a glacial traverse, and we were out in the middle of the glacier, and I have it looking back with some other of the party I was with at the glacial moraine. So I'm looking to recreate that with our party out on the glacier. Again, showing, the moraine hasn't changed and the mountain behind the moraine hasn't changed, but where is the relation to the ice to those, known fixed rocks?
I'm so interested in seeing all of this because I've never seen a glacier before in my life, saying I've spent most of it east of the Mississippi, and the few times I've been west of the Mississippi has either been to the mountains of New Mexico or a wedding in Southern California when I was 10. And that's been it of my adventures west of the Mississippi. So I'm really, really looking forward to this.
Well, and in both cases, you were in very arid climates, whereas this is exactly the opposite. The reason you've got a glacier at a relatively low altitude, I mean, the glacier is at around 6,000 feet. That's a very low altitude. So put it in perspective, our tallest peak here in North Carolina is around 6,000 feet. There's no way you'd ever get a glacier here, but it's farther north, so it's cooler, but the precipitation is just immense coming off of the Pacific Ocean. You get the rain shadow effect, so all this moisture comes in, hits the mountain and dumps. So that's why you have a rainforest at the lower elevations, and you end up getting a glacier at the upper elevations, simply because the massive amount of precipitation in the form of snow up in the mountain allows that to form.
Excellent. So we're talking photography here. There are going to be people that are going to be interested in the gear that you're using. So I'd be curious if you could just give us a quick insight to the camera that you originally brought, whether you still have it or not, but talk about the camera that you brought, the camera that you're bringing, and the lens that you shot on.
Well, I originally shot it all on a Nikon FM, and I still have it today. Film camera, shot it all on Ektachrome film, slide film. And it was all shot with a 50 millimeter lens, a Nikon 1.8, f1.8 50 millimeter lens. pretty standard lens for that camera back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I have that lens still today, and I'm putting it on my newer Nikon, the D750 digital. So I'm literally going to take the same images through the exact same lens. I'm simply going from doing it on film to doing it digitally. That's the kit I'll be using. But it's, to me, it's kind of fun that the images will be coming through the exact same piece of glass that they did 40 years ago.
Which I think just shows to the testament of, these lenses from the 70s, 80s, and 90s were built like tanks. That
Well, certainly depending on which ones you bought, and this was, a quality Nikon lens, and yeah, they're tough. In fact, that camera body and that lens took a dive with me down the glacier, or actually it was a snow field. We actually did a summit climb of Mount Olympus that summer. Of course, I took the camera with me, and we're climbing up this one snow ice pitch, and I lost my footing and started to slide, and grabbed the ice axe and go into self arrest. And it was never a high risk thing. It was simply because it was a snow field that then went down into a gradual slope out, and it was just, so there was no fall, there was no danger. It was just, oh, I got to climb this over again. But during that process, the camera and lens were underneath me, between me and the snow and the ice, all the way down. Finally got myself stopped, got up, dusted the snow and ice off the camera, looked, there was no damage, started taking pictures again. So yeah, they built them pretty tough back then.
Excellent. So I do also want to highlight to the people out there listening that if you are a video type person, I'm going to do my little plug here as well, that there will also hopefully be a short documentary documenting this trip of Chip going and recreating all these photos and the adventures along the way through a video format. That I've started to dive into video format work. And so hopefully we'll be able to kind of put a little bit of a visual story together, a video story together on top of these photographic, and see if we can find some way to kind of interlace them together and hopefully get that out to you all in hopefully not too long after the trip as well. But I do want to shift things here to, this is the artist spotlight. So we have 5 questions that we have to answer. And so starting down the list, number 1 is, what is your earliest memory of making art?
Well, I've been making things, building things with my hands since I was a kid. There's a picture of me at age 3 with a hammer and nails. And I'm not talking about a kitty hammer. I'm talking about a real hammer and nails pounding into 2x4s. And I also build a lot of plastic models, and I then got into building some custom balsa wood models. So I was building and making things and even taking things apart, not always putting them back together at first, but sometime once I figured that stuff out, and fixing things. So there was always that element. But in terms of art, my real first memory of that was junior high, and in Mr. Crable's art class. So Carl Crable, and he was a marvelous artist of his own right. Unfortunately, I just learned that he passed away in 2018. Ironically enough, he had been living right here in Raleigh. But yeah, Shaker Heights school system, Woodbury Junior High, Carl Crable's art class. He always had popular music of the day playing in the classroom to sort of lighten things up, and encouraged us to just, go with, our own feelings and create the images. And it was mostly painting and drawing, as I recall. And none of mine ever turned out to be of any consequence, but that's probably my earliest memory of making art.
You talked about this in one of your previous episodes, that young kids are some of the most creative minds because they haven't been bogged down by the woes of the world. And so I'm always love hearing about stories of kids making things because they have no inhibitions. They're just going to make what they want to make, and they're not going to care what anyone else is going to think about it because that's what they want to do. So for question 2 then is, how did you come to your current primary media?
So of course that media is photography. And it really goes back to probably age 8 or 10, was when I first picked up a camera. And I have to give credit to my grandfather, the Reverend Warren E. Darnell, for really getting me into photography. He was an avid photographer. And when he came to visit, he'd take me on photo safaris, is what he called them. And that would just be visiting the local park and seeing what we could see and capturing images of it. So that's probably the single biggest element that got me to photography was that. The only formal training I've had in photography was one photography class in college. Beyond that, but I've just enjoyed making images, and part of it is I've had a desire to create art, but I can't draw or paint to save my life. So photography is my creative tool that worked for me.
I think I got that gene from you because I can't draw worth anything either.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. That's why I've picked up photography as well. It's the same way. Like, I can't draw, but I can at least take a photo. So for question 3 then is, what inspires your art, or where does it come from?
Well, for me, it really comes out of the power and beauty of nature. That's where I find my greatest inspiration, particularly where the water meets the land. I just had an exhibition called the Water's Edge as an example of that. So those are the places where I really find my muse, if you will. And I think the other element to it is light, because photography is all about capturing light. And you can make that case for any of the 2D media, it's about the light. But particularly with photography, and you talk to almost any photographer, whether they're a street photographer or a fine art photographer, doesn't really matter. Once they sort of begin to understand light, they can't see things the same way that everybody else sees it, because the right light, and what I mean by that is the angle of the light, the color of the light, the quality of the light, is it harsh, is it diffuse, can transform an otherwise mundane scene into something spectacular. So beauty of nature and light are really my sources of inspiration.
So then following up on that really quick is, we talk about, different styles of art and different styles of photography. How would you classify your style or your type of photography you do? And I never want to pigeonhole you into one, because so many artists are multifaceted in their styles, but like, what are the kind of types of photography photo styles that kind of you are drawn to?
And that's one of the things that you often run into is this idea of find a particular, as an artist, doesn't even have to be a photographer, your style, and then just go with that. But I'm one who likes to play with a number of different things. The bulk of my work is what I call, fine art, landscape, and nature inspired images. What I generally mean by that is, they may be black and white, they may be color, but they'll have a particular sense of light and texture in them. I'm also really drawn to minimalist images. The less there is, sometimes the more impactful the image. And much of my work does not lend itself to Instagram, if you will. Instagram is all about vibrant colors and really sort of grab you kind of things. Mine are much more subtle.
Well, and it's even more so harder now because Instagram is transferring to video in vertical format more than ever. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
So moving on to our 4th question, and this is a question very important to me as growing up in a household of artists, is what advice would you give to artists starting their own art journey?
Well, I'll start off by plugging my own podcast, because I'm interviewing all of these artists and I ask them this question. There is a wealth of information in the podcast sessions from the artists that I've spoken to. But from my own personal experience, and it is reiterated by a number of the other artists, it comes down to sort of 3 things. Create what you love, ignore the detractors, and find your tribe. And what I mean by find your tribe is find the other creative spirits that will help encourage you and get you to produce even better work. So it's not just people praising you, they're giving constructive feedback and they're helping you become a better artist. So those are the three things.
I could always use a little bit more of that. For our fifth and final question, what artists or artists would you recommend that people check out and why?
Well, I can't get it down to just one. I would start off a guest on this show, actually my very first guest on this show. So if you haven't checked it out, that's Jamin Caceres. He is a color pencil artist who's just extraordinary. The work that I first got drawn to with him were still lifes of fruits, vegetables, and flowers, and his ability to capture light with colored pencil just blew me away. His current work is very interesting, very different from that. It's very self-exploratory, looking at his personal life and sexuality, and very sort of deep and revealing in a very different way than the stunning still lifes, but still very good. He's here in Raleigh down at Art Space. And then the next would be Thomas Heaton. And of course, you know Thomas. Thomas is a landscape photographer based in the UK and a very avid YouTuber. And he has definitely helped provide some inspiration for me in a variety of ways. So he's definitely one to check out. And lastly, another photographer, Cole Thompson. And I had a chance to meet Cole at a photography conference a couple of years back. And he does just stunning, very minimalist black and white photography. So I definitely encourage you to check out Cole's work. One of the unique things that he said in his presentation was that he practices photographic abstinence. And in that, he basically says, I don't look at anybody else's work. He doesn't look at Instagram. He doesn't look any place, because he's like, if I look at other people's stuff, it draws me away from who I am and what I have to say and what I have to create. I'm not that extreme, but I think it brings home for me the idea that, do what you love. But his would be the other piece or the other stuff to check out.
Awesome. Well, for all of you listening, we will have links to all of these people in the show notes of this episode, and also links to the other previous episodes and other artists that we've referenced here. So fear not, you will be able to find all of those references. So we have come to the end of our questions here, which means that we're starting to come to the end of our episode. But before we do that, I do want to make sure that people can find this project and your work, Chip. So first off, where can people learn more about this crazy, awesome expedition project that we're doing?
The easiest thing is to go to my website, chipfreundphoto.com. And in the menu there, you'll see 2022 project listed, and that'll take you to the webpage that is on it. You can also find it on GoFundMe. So if you've got a GoFundMe account, if you simply do a search on Blue Glacier then and now, you'll find it there on GoFundMe.
So that's in the digital universe of where we can find this project. Where can we find your work in the physical world?
Well, this project's work isn't yet in the physical world, but the rest of my work in the physical world you can find at the Cary Gallery of Artists in downtown Cary, North Carolina, and out at the coast on the Outer Banks in Manteo, North Carolina, at the Dare County Art Council Gallery.
Fantastic. Well, we will have links to all of Chip's social media handles and links to the GoFundMe and all of that work down in the show notes as well. Other than that, thank you, Chip, so much for letting me take the host chair for this extra bonus episode. It has been an absolute pleasure to, have this perspective, not only as a fellow artist and maker, but then also as a family member and son. So thank you so much, and really looking forward to this exciting project.
Well, thank you, Will. This has been a real treat, and thanks for stepping up to be the guest host. I couldn't imagine anybody better to have this conversation with. So thank you, and tune in next time. Thank you for joining us. This has been the Artist Spotlight with Chip Freund. find accompanying blog posts at shipfreundphoto.com/blog, and you may subscribe to our show on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like listening.